All right, thank you. You dressed up just for me? You look good. You look good.
Thank you, Anthony, for coming to Oxford this evening and joining us. I wanted to start, and as you all know, Hillary Clinton has just released her book, What Happened? And I thought perhaps this could inspire the start of our interview, What Happened? Could you talk us through, from the phone call from the president asking you to be the communications director, to how just 10 days into the job, you were fired?
Okay, so first off, it was 11 days, okay? I mean, don't chip me out of the 1 day, because it's 9.1% of my federal career, okay? So don't do that. So it was 11 days.
11 days.
So what actually happened was I was at the XM Bank, and I was the chief strategy officer there, and I got a call from Ivanka, who asked to meet with me. And then she called her dad, and her dad was off the... So if you've ever been in the West Wing, the Oval Office is in the back by the Rose Garden. You may get there someday, some of you, or some of the Americans may get there. And there's a den and a little study. The president's got this big 70-inch flat screen TV in there. So he's in there watching television with his DVR. And I walked in, and we had a conversation about things that he needed to change. And so since it was a privileged conversation, I can't go into too much detail about it. But he asked me to take on that role, and that was Thursday at 4:30. I said to the president, okay, you realize that there's going to be more than one person on your team that doesn't want me to have that role. And he said, yeah, I totally realize that. He said, but show up at 10 o'clock and you'll have the role. Those guys, they spent the whole evening trying to prevent me from getting the role. And at 10 o'clock the next morning in the Oval Office, I was appointed the comms director, and then the president turned to me and said, okay, I want you to do the press conference today. So I said, okay, no problem. When I walked back into the press secretary area, there was 30 people from the comms team there, and they said, okay, we're here to brief you on the press conference that you're about to have. And I said, okay, get out of the office. I don't need the briefing, because I didn't want to get clouded by whatever they were going to say, because I didn't know any of them. And so I did the press briefing. And then I did the job that the president asked me to do. And you mentioned a little bit of it, but what did the president ask me to do is to find and identify who were perpetrating the biggest amount of leaks inside the administration, and then to, effectively remove a lot of those people. And so you don't need to know a lot about Washington to know that the minute I was declared the hatchet man, that my duration in Washington was going to be very short-lived, because as soon as I was declared the hatchet man, the knives got longer and longer as a result of some of my adversaries. I told Steve Colbert, who's the American late night comedian, that he asked me how long I was going to last. I said, well, I thought I was going to beat a carton of milk. I didn't think I was going to get blown out of there before your milk got spoiled in the refrigerator. But I didn't think I was going to last more than 30 or 60 days. There was no way, given the magnitude of what had to happen, that I thought that was going to be possible.
And then talk us through the firing. So just 11 days later.
Well, the firing was sort of weird because, it was unclear up until that morning whether or not I was going to be in the job or not in the job. But I can tell you how I learned that I wasn't going to be in the job. I don't want to go into the conversations because, again, those conversations are privileged, but I will tell you how I learned that I wasn't going to be in the job. You get issued a White House-like bat phone, which is a security encrypted phone, so that your White House email and your cellular transmissions are more or less heavily encrypted relative to your regular phone. And so when I landed, I went with the president on Friday to West Islip, which is Long Island, which is where I live. He gave a speech on MS-13, the gangs, and what we were doing to stop the gang violence in America. And so I stayed home over the weekend, visited my family. And so I took the 6 o'clock shuttle back to Washington. When I landed, I went to turn the White House bat phone on, and it wasn't working. See that? And then I knew I was a dead man. Looked at the phone, I said, oh man, this is not going to be a good day for me. And so I will tell you this, I got fired at 9:37, but it didn't come out until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. See that? So we had the leakers on the run. Okay, they were not going to leak the information. They've started leaking again now. It's a different sort of leaking than the one that was going on prior to that episode. It's a different style of leaking. But the biggest story of the day was my firing, and it didn't leak, which I thought was sort of fun and ironic.
And when the firing itself was because of the journalist leaking. And
is that what you think it was?
Well, it's...
How many people in the room, well, let's have a little participation from the audience. How many people in the room think it was the journalist and the interview that got me fired? Raise your hands. How many people think it was something else? What do you think it was, Chris?
Well, I think given that you just asked that, it's probably not the...
It probably wasn't. Probably wasn't that, but you know, let me tell you something about Washington. Okay, it's like the Game of Thrones screenwriters got together with the Hunger Games screenwriters, and then they met the House of Cards guys, and then they wrote the script. You follow what I'm saying? But it wasn't that. You can trust me on that. It wasn't that. If you do your research on it, that was used as an excuse, but that really wasn't it. At the end of the day, and I owed this to General Kelly, once he became chief of staff, it was incumbent upon him to want to shape the staff to his liking, and so he made the decision to fire me. And as an American entrepreneur and as somebody that's run 2 companies and frankly started 2 companies, I owed that to him. I couldn't really even fight that, actually, because at the end of the day, as a CEO, if someone put me in a job and I thought I needed to replace a few people for personality reasons or other reasons, you know, when you're in a corporation or you're in a startup or even a political administration like that, you sort of have to allow people to put their own imprimatur on the situation.
What became clear...
I just want to point one other thing out. Okay, there was an Access Hollywood tape. Everybody remember that one? Okay, so it wasn't that terrible of a thing, the 3 curse words to the reporter who dishonestly recorded me. It wasn't that terrible of a thing. It wasn't a good thing. I didn't say that, but it wasn't that terrible of a thing. All right, go ahead, I'm sorry.
What became clear from our conversation upstairs were that either your political views are very different to President Trump's, or your political views are quite similar, but those surrounding President Trump have made him lean further to the right than he would be if he was acting on his own. That to me either says that what came out was that you very much suggested that it was those around him that had the most influence, and he had very little say himself, despite being the president.
If it came across that way at dinner, I didn't want it to come across that way. What I would prefer to have you think about it in the following context: that in my mind, and for 20 years that I knew the president, that he was primarily what I would call a New York-style Republican. And so most of you aren't from New York, so I'll sort of explain that, where you have some social progressivism and you have some more Republican ideas about the free market. I think that the president is still, in many respects, this is my fundamental belief, he's still in many respects that way. But I think one of the problems is the way the communication is coming out of the White House and the way some of his strategists, you get what I'm saying? Okay, portrayed him and portrayed himself is probably not super successful for the administration. So I believe that there will be a pivot in the next 6 to 12 months where the president will do what he's very good at. He'll start cutting a deal. You saw him reach out to the left-leaning leaders in our country, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. He's done that twice now. He cut a deal with them on the debt ceiling. He's got the DREAMS Act immigration bargaining chip on the table with them right now. And so I do think he pivots, and where he has come across perhaps as more right-leaning, he probably isn't really that way. My guess is he'll pivot into the center here.
Well, let's look at an example. He issued that executive order on transgender troops, for example. And just as you arrived, one of the first things you asked me was, well, firstly, my political view, and secondly, my view on same-sex marriage. And you also described yourself this evening as an LGBTQ activist. How then can you...
See, some of you guys are surprised by that, right? Because I supported Trump, but you know, for the last 10 years, I've actually, you know, been a gay rights activist in New York. In fact, if you do your homework, what you learn about me is I was part of that movement that got the 4 Republican senators in the state of New York to vote on marriage equality. I also funded Chad Griffin from the Human Rights Campaign on the Proposition 8 Supreme Court case that Ted Olson brought with David Boies. So you had a right-leaning Solicitor General, Republican-minded, and David Boies, who had worked for Vice President Gore, bring that case to the Supreme Court, which led to marriage equality throughout the land. I've also worked with Vice President Biden. If you remember your American political history, or at least current event history, it was really Vice President Biden that came out and said that President Obama should support the gay rights movement. And to go really far back, you know, President Obama was against gay marriage in 2008. And so what you should be comforted by, your generation, frankly, has already litigated this issue. I don't think people in your generation, frankly, care who marries who. I certainly do not. I have gay family members. And, you know, I said to Chris and some of his friends that the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you know, maybe that was written in a patriarchal time in our society, but I think today it doesn't mean just for straight people, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It means for everybody. So I'm unabashed in my support of marriage equality, as I have been for 11 years since I started in that movement.
Well, I wasn't saying that to question, actually, whether you're an LGBT activist or not, but that is clearly one of the things that has become apparent, and that is just one of many examples in which your views, or at least the actions that have come out from the Trump administration, differ from President Trump. So, why then, what did Trump see in you, given these differences, given that you are more liberal, seemingly? Okay, and secondly, why did you take the job?
Let me frame that for you. I think it's important, and I said this to you, and you should really think about this, because words actually do matter, not just the curse words. There are other words that actually matter. Sometimes, it depends on what neighborhood you're in. But you know, what I tell people is that I'm socially inclusive and I'm fiscally responsible. And so I'll explain that, because if I tell people that I'm socially liberal in the United States, they spent billions of dollars on getting half of the United States to hate the word liberal. And if I tell people that I'm fiscally conservative, well, then guess what? Billions of dollars have been spent on that word to get half of the United States to hate the word conservative. And so for me, the framework that I've always operated in terms of my political ideology is that I'm socially inclusive and fiscally responsible. So to answer your question, I am a Republican. I was, you know, born in the age of Reagan and Thatcher. I went to college 33 short years ago, which you guys are in college now, but you'll be blown away about how quickly that goes by. And so my recommendation to you is that you're here living in a bus station. You should live without fear. You should do the things that you really want to do in your life. But for me, I got raised as a Republican. I worked in the Republican Party. I supported one Democrat, and that was a law school classmate of mine, Barack Obama. And so in 2008, if you do your research on me, I politically bundled for Barack Obama in 2008. Raised him money, gave him personal money, because we knew each other in school. And to this day, even though my political leanings are different than his on some issues, I still respect him as a person. But I have been, other than that one campaign, I have been a Republican. So you may know this about me or not, but I backed Governor Walker. And then after I backed Governor Walker, I was with the Jeb Bush campaign. So that was low energy. Somebody laughed at that, but when I said Jeb Bush, most of the Americans heard low energy, right? Am I wrong? So you have to give the candidate Trump pretty effective at making those sorts of comments, right? But when I went with then candidate Trump, it was because I'm a team playing Republican, and I said consistently in the American media that I was going to back the eventual nominee. And so here's what I would say to everybody in this room, and it's a great line by the former mayor of New York. Mayor Koch once said, if you believe in 9 out of the 12 things that I'm saying, you should vote for me. If you believe in 12 out of the 12 things I'm saying, you need a psychiatrist. And the point being is that you're never going to find a politician that matches your 5 fingerprints. It's not going to happen. If you find that person, quit your day job and go work for that person, he or she. But I'm going to tell you that we're in a very, very complex society. We've got very complex things going on right now, domestically here in the UK, domestically in the United States, but also internationally. And so I think it's going to be very hard for people in this room to fingerprint to a politician identically. So the president is a Republican-leaning person. He has set forth a process of deregulation in the country, which is helping the business community. You mentioned the transgender thing. The transgender thing was reversed by Mattis. You didn't see the president push back on that. And so, I think there's been a lot of social progress made. And these are, for some people, very tough decisions. For me, a decision like that is a no-brainer. But for some people in our society, they're tough decisions. And so what I don't like about what's going on right now is that we have major, major polarization at a time when we need major, major collaboration. And so we got to fix that. And I can tell you, I can't speak for Great Britain, but I would imagine sort of the same thing going on here. But we have to fix that in the United States because it's still 23.6% of the GDP of the world. It has the most powerful military by a factor of 10. You could take the next military spending of the next 10 leading nations. You don't add up to the United States. And so we've got to make that organism, that political organism, work better than it is right now.
Okay. Do you look back on your tenure as Director of Communications as a success or as a failure, both personally and for the Trump administration?
Well, getting fired sucks. Okay, let's just put it that way. Okay, I mean, that's not the first time I've been fired. If you ask me, I can tell you my first time I got fired, it was also not fun. But again, you have to understand that, like, if you're asked to do a job like that for the President of the United States, some of you probably follow sports. If you're in baseball and you get hired as a manager, guess what? The day you got hired is the day that you're planning your firing. And so the job that I got hired into and the specific role that I was given above and beyond being the communications director was going to lead to my eventual departure. So was it too abrupt for my liking? Absolutely. But here's something that I will tell you about life. There can be no whining in life. I'm not a whiner. I got fired. I took it like a man or a woman, and I walked out of there. See, I said, why did I get myself in trouble? Because you got the tape going. But my point is that, like, in sports and politics, there are winners and losers, and when you're on the losing side of something, the worst thing that you can do is crawl into a hole. Now, I will make an observation for everybody in this room that reasonably effective communicator, have an interesting background. I grew up in a blue-collar family, and yet I got myself into Tufts and Harvard Law School, and we were talking about student loan crisis in the United States. I had to fund that myself. And then I ended up at Goldman, and I built a couple of businesses. But in Washington, the opportunity now is the politics of personality destruction. So if you're effective, the opposing side needs to mash you into a two-dimensional caricature to dehumanize you so that your voice can't be heard. And so if you allow that to happen to you, and I'll speak to every student in this room, under no circumstances can you allow that to happen to you in life. And so if you were going to get some advice from me to take away tonight, the 3 pieces of advice that I'd give everybody in this room is, number 1, you shouldn't really care what other people think of you. Live to your true self. Number 2, if you get caught in a situation like me, the only time that it's over is when you make the decision to quit. It's not when somebody else declares it being over. And the third thing is, if you're not having fun, because again, you're only here visiting, if you're not having fun, then don't do it. And I can tell you that, and it was 11 days, I had a blast. I was on I had a great time. I was on Air Force One 3 times. I'm hanging out in the Oval Office with the president. You can tell I'm a pretty upfront guy, so you could imagine that there were colorful conversations between me and the president of the United States. We're both New Yorkers, and so, we're both prone to some drama and hyperbole. And so, it was an interesting period of time, and I wouldn't change it for anything. In other words, if you told me right now, I'd have to go back into that situation and have the humiliating experience of being fired like that, would I do it? And the answer is yes, 1,000%. Sign me up.
Okay. Looking at President Trump's communication strategy itself, is there a strategy, firstly? or is the entire communication space, thank you, is the entire communication space just reactive of his Twitter?
Well, here's something I will tell you that I've found is that when the president feels like he's being well defended, I think his tweets are more focused on public policy, and they're more focused on reaching over the top of the mainstream media in the United States and going directly to the American people. When the president doesn't feel that he's being superly well defended, then you get conversations about Mika's facelift and things like that. So, if it were up to me, I would recommend more on policy and more on substance and more on the prosecution of his legislative agenda and less on that other stuff. So, but I do think that Hope Hicks, who replaced me, is a terrific person. Sarah Huckabee, one of the first things that I did was name her the press secretary. I think she does a very good job for the president on television. She's the first mom in that position. She's got 3 young children at home. I'll tell you a quick story about management, because I think this is important to you if you ever go to run a company. So at 10:30, the bomb hits that I'm the communications director. At 10:13, Sean Spicer quits. Thank God he quit, because I was going to fire him, but he quit. And so, and by the way, I never called him Melissa McCarthy, okay? That was like a false, fake news, okay? I never called him, I called him Liar Spice from the Spice Girls, okay? Every Spice Girl's got a nickname, and so I gave him one too, okay? So he was Liar Spice, he wasn't Melissa McCarthy. But when he left, he had the very big office on that side of the West Wing, and then the communications director has a small office. So Sean at that time was de facto communications director and press secretary. Sarah came to me, she's a very gracious person from the South, and she said, Mr. Scaramucci. I said, call me Anthony, Mr. Scaramucci's my dad. She said, well, I want to give you the big office. And so if you know the West Wing, the offices are very small, but the press secretary's office is as large as the chief of staff's office because they designed it that way. Teddy Roosevelt designed it that way so that when the press was in there and they did a press gaggle, they could fit the press in that office. And I said to Sarah, you're the press secretary. Even though I have seniority over you, you're going to be in the press secretary's office. Number one, I'm a traditionalist, and number two, you've earned the job. Moreover, I'm an entrepreneur. I could run my business off of my cell phone inside of a phone booth. I don't need a big office. And so it's a learning lesson for people in this room that when you're managing a company, one of the things that you should always think about is not care so much who gets the credit, because you can sort of get anywhere you want in life as long as you don't care who gets the credit or who gets the position. Control your own ego.
You mentioned Sean Spicer. Why was he so opposed to you? Why was it that instant that he...
Well, it was a combination of factors. I think him and Reince were very opposed to me. This is another learning lesson from that experience. If you are a political donor, which I was, you could find the amounts of money that I gave to the president and his campaign and his PAC online, so I won't go into that. But it was a significant sum of money. I also gave a significant sum of money to the RNC. I did media appearances for the president that if you totaled the media appearances, it was over $100 million of media buy, meaning if we had to buy that advertising time on MSNBC or Fox or these other affiliates, it would have cost about $100 million. And then I went out and bundled for the president. So I was a triple threat in terms of the campaign. But this is an axiomatic fact of American politics. When you are a donor, there are 2 jobs available to you. If you're a political outsider, the 2 jobs that are available to you are the ambassadorship or you can be on one of these councils. You can be on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. You can be on its Import-Export Council. You can be on the Competitive Council like Steve Schwartzman is with Jamie Dimon. But what you can't be inside the president's inner circle and one of his political operatives as an assistant to the president, because that's a huge threat to the permanent political class inside of Washington. And so when the president gave me my first job, which was the OPL directorship, both Reince and Sean worked in that Game of Thrones-like manner and that House of Cards-like manner to block that position on me. And so it was 7 months later when I got in, and then they said, oh, geez, you know, he got in despite our efforts, time for me to go. Reince wasn't as smart as Sean. So that's the truth.
Looking at the US political system as a whole, what gives you more power, money or public office?
It's a really good question. So it really depends. So if it depends on what you want to do. As an example, if President Clinton was here tonight and you said, Mr. President, because I've asked him this direct question, have you done more good for the world being president, or did you do more good for the world in your foundation? The president would say, as president, because with a stroke of a pen through executive privileges and sort of discretionary spending of the president, you know, you can wave billions of dollars around the world. George W. Bush doesn't get hardly any credit for this, but Bono gives him credit for it. He single-handedly waved several $billion into the continent of Africa in the mid-2000s, which led to a direct reduction in malaria mortalities. And so he doesn't get a lot of credit from that from the left-leaning press, but the lead singer for U2 gives him credit for that. There's many people in these African communities that give him credit for that. And so it depends on what you want to do. If you want to organize the political system and you want to influence a lot of politicians, money will make a very big difference for you. But I don't think there's anything more powerful in our country than being the President of the United States in terms of what your discretionary powers are and the influence that you can have in the society. So I would go with public office.
Looking at that a bit more, what role should private wealth play in politics, whether through direct representation or interest groups?
I mean, so this is the biggest debate in our country now. So after the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which basically the Supreme Court ruled that money was a form of freedom of speech and freedom of expression in a democracy, you were able to give an unlimited amount of money to a political action committee to wield your influence. Many pluralistic democracies have sided against that. They've opted for some kind of campaign finance reform or some kind of medium ground where there's a flat playing field no matter how much money is involved. I have taken the position, and so far I've been proven right, and maybe long term I'll be proven wrong, but I have taken the position, and I actually wrote an op-ed about this when the Citizens United case came out, that the ideas in America would matter way more than the money, because what's happened now is that we've dematerialized America. Years ago, you had to go to a television studio or a radio studio. Today, you can take out your phone, which is a television studio and a radio studio, and you can broadcast live on Facebook, you can broadcast live on Twitter. I firmly believe that the president, President Trump, without the tool of Twitter, likely would have not won the election. I think that that tool was a very effective campaign device for him. The president was outspent by Secretary Clinton. I used to know the numbers exactly, but I think she outspent us 1.7 times what we had versus what she had. And she had more personnel than us by 2.4 times. And so she out-personneled us and she outspent us, and yet we still won the election. So it's not clear to me that the money is as important as the ideas. Now, you made the point at dinner, which I'll reference, is that it may matter more in a local election, like a congressional seat or a Senate race or perhaps a gubernatorial seat. And I will cede to you on that. I do think it matters more there. And so it doesn't seem like, at least this is my opinion, that the duopoly in America, which is basically the Democrats and the Republicans, want to give up the Citizen United thing anytime soon. In fact, President Obama, who was against it, and you may remember this, was against it, actually formed a political action committee in 2012, and he was criticized for doing it, and he said, well, hold on a second, I have no choice but to do it because the other side is arming up in this way. I have to commensurately arm up as well. And so I think that's where the parties are right now. So I think it doesn't really matter what I think. It's probably not going to change.
Okay. My final question before we open up to the audience. What's next for you? Are you going to pursue a role in politics, a further role in politics?
I'm going to pursue a 12-day role. That's going to be my goal. I'm going to look for something that lasts 12 days. You know, like it'll be like the 12 days of Christmas. You know, the funny thing about this is like it's now a unit of time. People say like, I just went on vacation for a Scaramucci, you know, like 11 days. You know? But I can try to get a 12-day role. No, listen, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business person. I'm probably going to start up another company. I'm looking at right now the student loan space. I'm interested to hear the take here in the United Kingdom, but we have a student loan crisis in the United States. There's $1.4 trillion of student loans outstanding. Each student has something like 40, pretty much similar to what goes on in the UK. It's $40,000 to $60,000 worth of student loans outstanding. They're having a hard time repaying those loans, and there might be some business ideas around that to help solve that problem. So I'm looking at that. I'll probably get more active and more involved in television in some respects. I think that there's an opportunity, and again, this is not to say that I'm a centrist, because I don't think of myself as a centrist, but I do think that there's an opportunity to create space for more collaboration. And I do believe that the generation of men and women that are sitting in this room right now, I've sort of gotten a raw deal from the baby boomers, which I happen to be a member of. I think the political class in the West, the baby boomers, they were handed a baton from the greatest generation that fought the Second World War, and they've sort of squandered the treasure of the West. We've overpromised people, we've deficit spent into oblivion, we're prosecuting wars that we don't really have a sound strategy for properly exiting from. And so, unfortunately, you guys are going to inherit this, and I'm hoping that you inherit it without the polarity and the extremists that we've experienced in my generation. And so I'm hoping to be a part of that in some way, shape, or form going forward. And maybe that'll last longer than 12 days. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're now going to open up to the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand nice and high and wait until a microphone comes to you. So let's start with you in the red. Yeah. So just wait for a microphone to come.
Mr. Mooch, thank you so much for being here. We're all so thrilled. So both your rise and your fall within the White House coincided with really big power shifts with the chief of staff. So when you first came in, you reported directly to the president over the chief of staff, which is not a typical reporting structure.
Okay,
and
so you're pretty smart. You go to Oxford, right? So why do you think that was?
Right, well, obviously he went bye-bye. But the whole point too of your exit as well was the chief of staff coming in and taking power back. So my question is a prerequisite to a functioning White House a chief of staff who has all the authority and all the reporting mechanisms? Yeah.
I think it depends on the president, and it depends on the chief of staff. I mean, there's a great book, Chris Whipple just wrote a great book called The Gatekeepers, and he goes back to the chief of staff position in the United States was actually created by General Eisenhower when he became president. He took his former chief of staff from the Army and moved him into that position because he thought he needed to organize and institutionalize it. If you know your presidential history, John Kennedy did not have a chief of staff for a couple of years. So he tried to disavow it, and it turned out that because the government was getting bigger and much more complex, that you needed that sort of filter, if you will, to the president. So it really depends on the personalities. I think General Kelly is an American patriot. I have a lot of respect for him. I am not sore at him at all for firing me. However, and this is not me giving him advice through YouTube or anything like that, but I do think that there's like a whole jar of sugar cookies that the chief of staff can give out to people. And if General Kelly was slightly more political, I think he could be very helpful to the president on his legislative agenda. And so one of the hallmarks of his success in life is that he was a apolitical four-star general. But in many ways, what you find about that chief of staff position, if you understand the history of it, you were also operating with some level of political interest that's on side with the president. And so I don't think it's about the power structure as much as it's about the personalities and the deployment of the personalities.
So you think that it would have been sustainable for you to continue to report directly to the president as well as having?
Me personally, no. I would have very gladly subordinated myself to General Kelly. I would have had no problem doing that. They didn't give me a chance to do that, by the way. But it was reported in the press that I had a conversation with General Kelly where I said, well, I have to report directly to the president. And he said to me, no, you're fired. That did not happen. That was fake news. He fired me before I could say anything, actually. So, I mean, that's just a fact. But the truth of the matter is, you're asking a really good question, and there has to be order, but there also has to be a little bit of a political element to that job as well, because you got a job to do. You've got to prosecute the president's legislative agenda. And time is, we're like in episode 4 of Star Wars. Remember the scene where Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and the garbage compactor is closing? The walls are closing in now because you're going to run up against the congressional elections in 2018.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for that question. Let's go to you at the very back in the blue. Yeah, you.
Hi. So to quote the famous C.S. Lewis, who once said about Jesus, he was either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. Not to compare Trump to Jesus, but I think Trump could be one of 3 things. He could either be a liar who says what he thinks appeals to his base just to get elected. He's either a lunatic, someone who's sociopathic and incapable of behaving in a normal fashion, or he's a genius and managed to manipulate the American political system to get himself elected almost out of nowhere. Of those 3 choices, which one do you think he is? Thank you.
Am I allowed to choose none of the above, or I got to go with one of those 3? Look, here's the thing that you probably intuitively know. And that's a really cool quote. I've got to look that up now and try to memorize it. But at the end of the day, the world is not that absolute and it is not that specific, and neither are you. You're a complex organism, and you don't have to read Damien from Hermann Hesse or Siddhartha to recognize how complex you are, that there's good parts of you and there are bad parts of you, and there are good parts and bad parts of all of us. So what I would say about the president is that you have to accept that he's a political genius. If you don't like him, that's fine, but you have to look at the 0 to the American presidency in 19 months. He started on June 16th of 2015. 19 short months later, he's the American president. So you can't say that there wasn't some level of political skill and instinct and some level of genius in terms of his judgment and his skill set and his campaign style. Now, you may not agree with any of it, but you have to say, okay, here's a guy that had Secretary Clinton had 40 years worth of name recognition built up by herself and President Clinton. She was in the public life for 40 years, and this was an American business person that 13 short months later became the American president. So we have to yield to him that he had some level of political genius. Again, you may not like his form of genius. He's definitely not a sociopath. And so you guys will snicker at that because of the way the media portrays him. But I have been in the room, the Hamilton musical where you're in the room where it happens. And let me tell you something about the president. He is way more contemplative. He is way more thoughtful. He's way more of a person that doesn't want to put American troops in harm's way or bring about wars than you would think. And even if his Twitter feed is cantankerous or is filled with some bellicosity in terms of the rhetoric, he is definitely not that way. I have seen that up close and personal. And what was the first one? A liar? Okay, all right, well, I want you to raise your hand in the room if you're not a liar. Raise your hand in the room. Okay, so I stand case closed on that one. Let's go to the next question. I didn't hear, someone said something, I didn't hear it.
Yeah, let's go to you in the grey.
Hi, thanks for the interview just given. What I want to ask, as someone with, I guess, experience in the sort of communication side of things, I want to ask what I think everyone in the world wanted to know during the campaign. How did Trump's campaign not sink when there were so many things that would have sunk anyone else's campaign, be it to do with his tax returns or leaked audio tapes or allegations and court cases, Trump
really
University, what should have derailed any candidate didn't.
Yeah.
From your perspective and
Yeah.
your experience, this is, kind of your profession. How did it not sink?
Okay, so that's like a really good question, and I'm sure that there'll be presidential historians that write about that, or campaign historians that write about that for 100 years. So I can give you a field observation, but I also want to be very, very honest, and I told Chris this earlier, and some of the Americans may know the answer to this, but how many times did Secretary Clinton go to the state of Wisconsin during the campaign? Okay, so somebody said 0. So the first answer to your question is Secretary Clinton. Had she deployed herself differently in the campaign, she won the popular vote by, I think, 3.5 or 4%. But there were certain mission-critical states that she needed to win to secure the Electoral College vote. And so I just submit this to you, and again, this is hindsight now, this is 2020 hindsight, so I'm not trying to be smart alecky about this, but you had the state of Wisconsin that had a sitting Speaker of the House who was a Republican, and you had a governor in Wisconsin that was winning in a blue state. He won the blue state of Wisconsin 3 times. He won it the first time, then he had a recount, and then he won re-election. And so I don't know who her political operatives were, I don't know who the geniuses were on her side that said, hey, you don't have to go to Wisconsin, it's bluer than blue, you don't have to worry about it. But the president and then the candidate went 16 times to Wisconsin. And so that's the biggest thing. Okay, now on the separate category, which I think is very seminal, and somebody will write about this from a historical perspective, that there is a desperation in our society, and I'll make a confession to everybody in this room. I grew up in a blue-collar family, and so my dad ran a crane, he ran a payloader, and then he graduated to like weighing trucks, and then they eventually gave him an inside desk job as he got older. But I priced my father's wages, his 1975 wages priced in 2015, through no fault of his own, were down 40%. So that's through automation, robotics, a surplus of labor, all kinds of things disrupted my non-educated blue-collar dad from being able to afford the middle-class lifestyle that I grew up in. But I'm going to make a confession to you guys. I insulated myself from that world. I went to Tufts, and my parents thought that Tufts was spelled T-O-U-G-H-S. They had no clue, okay? And then I went to Harvard Law School. Then I went into Goldman Sachs, and I started my ascent up the spire of economic elitism. And I moved classes and became financially independent, and then I started hanging out with people who were very rich. And the collective bias of those people informed my opinion of what was going on in the society. And I can tell you that a seminal moment for me was May 23rd, 2016. We were flying on Trump Force One to Los Angeles, and we were making a campaign stop in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we landed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The candidate got off the plane, and we headed Secret Service caravan to the Albuquerque Civic Center. There were 9,000 people waiting for him in the Civic Center. There were 7,000 people waiting outside. Now, I was one of the campaign aides, so I had a Secret Service day pin on. That meant if there was a commotion, they wouldn't shoot at me, thank God, right? But I took it off. I put it in my pocket. And I crossed the security perimeter, and I went into the crowd. And I started asking questions. I said, where are you from? Why are you here? Can you tell me why you're here? And one gentleman said to me, well, I'm here because I just lost my job. The factory just closed down. My dad worked in that factory for 33 years. I worked there for 12. The United States lost 70,000 factories since the signing of NAFTA. Again, you could agree with NAFTA or disagree with it. I'm just giving you the numbers. And so this Albuquerque family, the father, now deceased, 33 years in the factory. The son, 12 years in the factory. He's out of a job. He's at the Lowe's, which is a home improvement center, and he's delivering Domino's pizza at night. So he's got 2 jobs, and he's on an EBT card, which is a form of social welfare. And he said that I'm economically desperate. I cannot raise my children in this current economic environment. Now, I'm making a confession, and you guys are recording this. 28 years having departed Harvard Law School, I was out of touch. I actually missed what was going on in the middle class. The working class family that I grew up in was an aspirational working class family. My dad was like, you're gonna go to school, you're gonna go to law school, you're gonna start a business, and you too will share in part of the American dream. That family was desperational. So we went in 40 years from aspirational to desperational, and I'm gonna tell you guys something, I didn't see it. It took a billionaire living in a tower on Fifth Avenue next to the Tiffany store to show it to me. But Bernie Sanders saw it. And I told Chris and some of his colleagues that there were 17 or 18 people in the campaign, and there were only 2 candidates that saw it. It was Bernie Sanders and Donald J. Trump. And so when he went up against the establishment candidate, Secretary Clinton, again, I don't dislike her, and you could never find me saying anything bad about her on YouTube. I always argued policy. I never said anything mean-spirited about her. But why the American people gave him a pass, his voters, is that they were desperate for change. They really have felt that the way maybe some of the people here in Great Britain feel that the operational community in the EU is out of touch with the local worker, many people in the United States have felt that Washington is actually out of touch with their economic situation. And so they gave him a pass on everything because they viewed him as not being a politician, and they viewed him, well, somebody that could throw a bomb in here and blow this thing up, that's gonna be good for me and my family. And so that's what I think happened. But I'm gonna tell you what, if she went to Wisconsin, not she, if Secretary Clinton went to Wisconsin 2, 3, or 4 times, she may have beaten him. It may have been that simple of an equation. I know it's a long-winded answer, but I think it's very important to you to understand that even though I grew up in a family that derived its roots from a blue-collar neighborhood, I too missed what was going on in the society.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You stand up.
Hi. So my context is that I sort of went to my undergrad in the States, Middlebury College in Vermont. And so we can't leave Vermont without being a bleeding card liberal, which is what I sort of am. My question really is more of a personal question to you. I really struggle to sort of understand sort of like your political transition in the sense that going from Obama to sort of supporting Jeb Bush to Trump, I'm not entirely sure what that was. Was it the office? Was it the fact that he was president and the power of the president?
Yeah.
Or was there some sort of like personal charisma with Trump that spoke specifically to you?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So what I would say is the anomaly in my political support is actually President Obama. Is that if you went back to like me in college to where I am today, the only deviation I made from the Republican Party was President Obama because there was a personal relationship there, and we knew each other in law school, and so I looked at President, and to this day, I have a very good relationship with President Obama, and I respect him as a person. There were things that he did politically that I disagreed with, and so I went back to my Republican roots after, supporting him the first time. As it relates to President Trump, I sort of said it. I was with 2 other candidates prior to the president, but I view myself as a team player. Played athletic sports my whole life, and I thought it was important to stay with the party and stay with the team. And so I've known the president for a long time. I can't tell you that we were friends 20 years ago, but I did make his acquaintance 20 years ago. We worked together on the Romney campaign in 2012. And even though I didn't support him on the first two waves, I did make a commitment to him and to the Republican Party that I was going to support the eventual nominee. Had it been Ted Cruz, I would have supported him. So And again, but I like the president. So I'm not somebody sitting here in this room telling you that I dislike the president. I do think, and I said this from the press podium, which was sort of a lot of fun, by the way. I mean, it's not as, you guys are a lot better looking than American journalists, I can tell you that. But I was sitting up there, and I took 46 minutes of questions, and I said what I really believe, that there's a spread between what he's really like as a person and how he's perceived by the media, and also he's doing some damage to himself in terms of the way he's positioning himself. He's a guy that you would be, if you got to know him, you would have a different opinion of him. And I would submit this to you, that most of these people, and I can say this about Secretary Clinton, if you're a Republican, Republicans spent billions of dollars mashing her into a two-dimensional cartoon character. She's nothing like that, and neither is he. And so what I would say is you've got to be very, very careful about the way you're getting information from the media and the way you're collecting your own biases. You know, I just admitted to you guys that 28 years of trying to get up the economic mountain, I closed myself off from a large part of the society, and I didn't really see what was going on. So I'm not here as an apologist for the president. I can tell you things that he's doing that, you know, I wish he could do better, and I can tell you things that he's doing that I like. But in general, he's a way better person than most people perceive him to be. You don't like the answer, I got that, but that's fine. But you're from Middle Ferry, Vermont, so it's all right. There's a lot of Bernie Sanders support up there. Yeah, yes, I don't know. Am I allowed to pick the people, or you're
this
picking
guy's
the people?
almost jumping off his
Okay,
seat.
sorry.
To
You're picking the people.
I'm
answering the question.
You go. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Scaramucci. You've
You
told
can,
us
you can
to...
call me Mooch. Well, you and I are getting close. It's okay.
Thanks to Mooch then. You told us to be brave tonight, seeing that we're in university, so I'm going to be brave. You said that you didn't just like the president, you said you loved the president. I don't even think you said it once. I think you said it about 10 times. Maybe once a day.
All right, so hold on a second. Hold on a second. The times I said I loved the president actually matched the number of days I was in office. How about that? Because I counted them. I said it 11 times. Keep going. That's true.
For me, it's difficult to comprehend how you could love a man who to the world appears very much a bigot. To build a wall, to lead to mass deportations, to exit the climate accord. You spoke about how your generation has given our generation a broken society, a broken planet. How is it that you can now say you love this person and then charm us the entire evening and create distance between yourself and the Trump administration? To me, I'm not charmed.
That was very good. Good job. I'm really not here to charm you. You know, I'm here to talk to you from my heart. And so you can like what I'm saying or dislike what I'm saying, and then I'll leave it up to your intelligence to form your own opinion. I'm not here to charm you, and I'm not here to bring any distance between me and the Trump administration. I declared my feelings for the president. And you have to understand something. Where'd you grow up? Where are you from?
South Africa.
You're from South Africa. Okay, so in the Italian neighborhood that I grew up in on Long Island, we use the word love a lot. Okay, I also did this from the podium. I got roundly ridiculed for that. Okay, but that's like a gesture like, see you guys later. Not that big of a deal to a guy like me. I'm very comfortable in my own skin. So I've told a lot of people that I love them. You and I would have to do a lot more courting after that question for me to fall in love with you. But in general, well, I'm sort of not either. But that idiom was used by me in a very natural way, and it got immediately contorted by the press and all that other stuff. I didn't say the society was broken. That's not what I said. I said that there was a mantle of the society is far from broken. If you look at the amount of wealth that's been created in the society, and you look at the billions of people that have moved from subsistence levels into some standard of living globally, the society is far from broken. There's an economic miracle taking place on the world, and there is a world, if we get the right policies, of economic abundance for everybody. So the society is far from broken. What I said was that opportunities have been squandered by the body politic in the West when they were handed a baton from the greatest generation that had to collaborate more because they had common cause versus the Cold War, and they had common cause versus common enemies. And now there's no existential threat to the West or the United States, and we've broken up into pieces and started fighting. Moreover, if you really know your history, and since you go to Oxford, I'm going to assume you do, there's a specter of nationalism that's taking place right now. And that typically happens after you've had a mortality of living memory of war. You can just go to Barbara Tuchman's book, The Guns of August, and you can see that that happened in August of 1914. And it's happening right now because there's no political leaders that remember the Second World War. And so the Catalonians want to break from Spain. Great Britain wants to leave the EU. The Scots want to leave the UK. The Greeks want to leave the EU. We're fighting over the Spratly Islands in Asia. And there's a systemic rise of nationalism with a lack of historical context, all of which is, frankly, not being addressed properly by your political leaders. So I'm open about that. I'm part of that failed community. I didn't say that I got it right and these people got it wrong. I said to you, I'm part of the baby boomer political class, and I can tell my other fellow baby boomers in this room that are not involved in politics, shame on you, because it's through your indifference that we've gotten this level of extremis and this level of polarity. Now you mentioned the environment, and so let's talk about the environment for a second, because I think this is important. The Paris Accord is a symbolic thing. Now, if you ask me point blank, what do I think of the environment? I've always answered that very honestly. I think that 60% of what's happening is probably human derived, and it's probably from carbon emission and changes that we've made through our industrialization to the Earth's atmosphere. But geologically, it's probably 40% being done from where we are right now in the position of the Earth from the sun. And so it's a combination of those two things. But if anybody in this room thinks that the Paris Accord is going to solve that, it doesn't do that, because it changes the centigrade tabulation by 0.3%. People are rampantly cheating inside the Accord. And so if you want to use the symbolism of being in the Accord, it's like you're standing on the right side of the environment, that's okay, but it's a way bigger problem than just staying in or being outside of the Paris Accord. So I'm not trying to charm you, brother, okay? I'm trying to talk to you in a very straight, very plain way. Okay, and by the way, your country didn't do so well for about 50, 60 years, okay, in terms of apartheid and all the nonsense that went on down there. Didn't do so well. Didn't do so well.
I think to clear that up, apartheid in South Africa, and seeing as I do study at Oxford and I do know my history, was supported by Ronald Reagan and the Reagan regime. In fact, since 1960, American corporations increased their investment in South Africa.
You're trying to score political points with your fellow students, and I respect that, but that doesn't really have anything to do with me.
I think all of us aren't charmed anymore. Thank you.
Let's,
okay.
Next question. Let's go to your original.
Thank you, Mooch. You mentioned that Donald Trump is a genius, but is he more intelligent than Rex Tillerson?
Do I really have to answer that one? I mean, I was doing really great till the South Africans showed up. Do I have to answer that one? I'm making a joke. You don't have to be that upset. I'm making a joke. I don't know if he is or he isn't, but here's what I would wish, okay, for us, okay? The Democrats have personality differences. I mean, I'm telling you, they do, okay? We don't have to get into the specific ones, but where I applaud the Democrats in my society, they go lockstep with each other, okay? And they hang tough with each other. The Republicans are shooting at each other. Okay, myself included, by the way, because when shots are coming in at me, I'm shooting at Bannon or Priebus, they're shooting at me. The president, me, Bannon, Priebus, we should probably dial it down. He mentioned Ronald Reagan, so I'll mention him as well. The 11th commandment that Ronald Reagan said about the Republican Party is, thou shalt not say anything bad about a fellow Republican. And so we haven't lived to
And he did
that.
about Gerald Ford.
I'm sorry?
And then he did about Gerald Ford.
Yeah, well, that's the hypocrisy of politics. But I mean, that's what happens, right? That's why someone's calling a person a liar. Everyone in the room's lying, so what do you want me to do? It's hypocrisy of politics and people. But at the end of the day, I don't know if he's smarter than them or not, but I wish we would dial back the rhetoric against each other. I really do wish that.
I think we have time for one more. So let's go to, you. You just went, no, there's the other, that one, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Earlier tonight, you made an excellent point about how we need more collaboration and less division in politics, but you've also been describing yourself as very much a team player Republican. Do you not think it's that kind of blind devotion, the attitude of my party, right or wrong, that's caused that division in the first place?
Okay, so again, this is just, I'm not trying to parse this, I'm just trying to explain, like, and we were talking about this before I came down to this beautiful hall, is like the president could have made a move to go for education reform. So he comes out of the blocks January 21st. Education is still one of the last vestiges of bipartisanship. And so he could have made a move to get a small win on the table with some kind of legislative agenda item related to a bipartisan commitment to evening and making more fair the public education system in our society. And that would have been a step towards more bipartisanship and more community up on the Hill. And so when you say that I'm blindly devoted, I elected to take a job to serve the President of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief. And so therefore, I feel this way, that I had to subordinate myself publicly to the agenda of the administration. That's not to say that in a private room or in a private setting that I wasn't giving my viewpoint on things like the transgender situation in the military, or that I wasn't giving my viewpoint on where I thought we needed to be with the Democrats in terms of securing some help from the Democrats. A lot of you are not from the United States, but I can tell you that if you want real tax reform in the United States, you need a bipartisan coalition to get that done. We have never done that without a bipartisan coalition. So the taxes came into place in 1913, the income taxes. They were reformed one time in the mid-50s by the Eisenhower administration. And then it took Ronald Reagan in his second term, after winning 49 states, to get the 1986 tax reform passed, and he had to do it with a coalition of Democrats. So again, I'm not trying to split the baby here. I'm just trying to say to you, I'm a team player, but I believe that my team, if you're asking me my honest opinion, my team should stand for more collaboration. We have no choice. The system was set up by the original documents and the founding fathers and mothers of the country to make sure that you never got a full loaf. Reagan said, and I know he's come here, he said he would go for 80% of something as opposed to 100%. And I think we've made mistakes doing that on both sides. So that was the point I was trying to make.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us. Please join me in thanking Anthony Scaramucci.